by Roy Anderson, supply chain lecturer extraordinaire at Northeastern University. And today we are going to be talking to you about AI-powered category management and really like what is the secret sauce of creating a category strategy. And with that, we'll jump into the agenda. And we're going to talk about traditional category management, the stuff that Roy and I learned, back in the 90s, and why that's changing rapidly, and why the scope of category management continues to advance. And we're going to talk quite a bit about how to build an internal landscape, and then taking all that information and using AI to look that in to get that into a forward-looking strategy that includes the external landscape and so on and so forth. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. So with that, Roy, how have you seen category management change? And there's a lot of stuff on the slides for today because we are very excited about category management. But we're going to try to talk, as usual, about sort of the back and forth and so on and so forth. So, Roy, talk about category management before and after.
Before and after. So, I mean, the key is what was available to us. So, traditional or historical to today, we had the ability to start doing spend analytics. So it's amazing how many companies are still not fully understanding their actual spend, and then building up to the fact that you have a strategy. You try to drive appropriate category supplier utilization, and sometimes that means consolidation, and other times that means you need more suppliers to fill the global expertise of the requirement, and then be able to go through those planning cycles. That's what we had available to us at the time. Today, the world is changed by significant data streams as well as technologies that are available. So now we just look at supplier relationship management. This is the entire end-to-end understanding of the supplier. Deep dive into where the supplier's long-term plans are going. Where are they investing their money? What are the risks that they bring to us because of their geopolitical scenario, their locations of their services and or products? How are they shipping these products to you? So the category strategy includes an enormous amount of additional information that's going to be required. Risk management, efficiencies. I would like to add in resilience. I love that the last comment, supplier ecosystem resilience. And resilience is the ability to get better when you have impacts to you. So you have a logistics problem. Well, how do you improve upon it so the next time you're actually able to minimize that risk because you've expanded the location where things are being shipped from, what type of suppliers you're dealing with. So the strategy of your category management is significantly more in tune with what the global aspects are, as well as, let's not forget, what your internal customers are trying to accomplish, because they're going faster and faster, and you need to spend that much more time with them. So the idea is connecting those internal customers with your external competencies of your supply base is what the category management function is becoming.
So can I also sort of say that when you and I started in procurement, it was all about sourcing at the end of the day. And as the function continued to mature and grow, now we have to worry about managing suppliers and transaction processing and operational risk and, right? Which then sort of drives the necessity of actually doing it broader, because everything that we do gets executed through either sourcing, managing a supplier, or transacting with a supplier. And all these other things kind of fall in underneath there. So let's jump to the next slide, right? So why the old tools don't work anymore, right? So you covered some of these things, but maybe, what jumps out at you is probably the most important things that has changed.
Our last comment was the bottom row, third over, limited understanding of stakeholder dynamics. If we don't know where our stakeholders are going, then we are blind to what we need to tell our suppliers. So what was difficult for me in the earlier days, because I was so wrapped up into the transactional activities to try to drive the sourcing to get something going in those days, the idea that actually talking to stakeholders on a regular basis. Now the question, did I have the internal team? Did I have the expertise within my organization to be able to have those intelligent future-looking conversations. And I bring up frequently that we still have old job descriptions that hire individuals that are nice, hardworking, but don't have the caliber of understanding that will make the internal customer our partner. So if you don't have a person in your organization, whether it's a third party or an employee or yourself, that doesn't understand what the stakeholder is dealing with and can't be intelligent, educated, and supportive of what they're trying to accomplish, you'll never understand the stakeholder dynamics. And that is literally job one. And if you fail there, then almost everything else you do is just going to be missing. The comment of, if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will get you there. And you got to know where you're going, and that's key. So I would say limited understanding really jumps out at me.
Yeah, and the other thing that always is interesting to me is, like, I've been a CPO a few different times, and the manual effort to extract the data from all these different places, consolidating it into one spot, and then even getting agreement about the data that sits on the piece of paper, right? It's often excruciating. And I worked for an organization with 140 people under me, and getting a category strategy was almost impossible because the disparity of the data, and then people didn't trust the data that we had to begin with. And again, if you can't even agree where you are, right, it's very hard to chart the path forward.
Yeah. So one of the job descriptions that I try to develop is a thing called data architecture. That is, because you have multiple systems, and unfortunately, many companies, including the ones I worked for, had multiple ERP systems. Therefore, there were possibly multiple procurement tools out there. There's data coming from third parties that you weren't able to handle. You need to have the architecture understanding is, how do you get into the point where you have the data that is going to be informative? Now, the two things that we bring to the table, and the table means the internal customer, the CFO, the CIO, the CEO, is the fact that we know what this entire company spends and who spends it. So we can bring groups together that had never talked together before, but they have common supplier requirements and therefore aggregation opportunities going forward. Two, we have the suppliers. As companies are growing and developing, you start to realize more and more of every revenue dollar is going out to your suppliers. And therefore, your suppliers are your differentiation in your company. People are doing design work with their suppliers. They're doing all of their operational work with their suppliers. Their marketing and advertising and legal services are out with the suppliers. That means the suppliers own an enormous amount of information that we've got to bring forward. And we've got to be that conduit that gets the best and the brightest suppliers on board, and then gets them to drive their data analysis, their understanding, their innovation back to my internal customers as efficiently as possible. Not to be a roadmap, not to be a stop sign, not to be a cop in the middle, but to speed the flow of accurate data. Not the fluff, not the salesmanship, not all that, but the actual data that makes decisions more important, impactful, more relevant to what the internal customers are looking for. Those two pieces of data we need to rely upon.
100%. And if you jump to the next slide, the interesting part to me now is how the technology is changing the landscape. So a lot of providers were out there in the past 3 years, for example, and they were providing category assessments as a service, so to speak, right? But now people are turning around and saying, well, wait a minute, are you treating General Motors as the same, with the same brush as you would say a bank, right? When you're buying something. And it's so individualistic that, you need to take in consideration, like, who you are, who's regulating you, if anyone. What is your spend? What is your spend concentration? What is your payment behavior? How critical is this category for you? And it changes everything. And with the advent of AI, we can actually do this kind of stuff, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, AI is going to obviously take this mass amount of data and then be able to clean it up more effectively based upon your, providing the guidance in that structure. Of course, you have to check and recheck that data as much as possible in that analysis. but you can now be much more personalized, much more specific across categories, across suppliers, and once again, to effectively explain that information to your internal customers. Because your internal customers, if you sit in their shoes and they're at their desk, they've got 10,000 other things going on in order to meet their engineering requirements, their financial requirements, their advertising requirement, production line activity. They just don't have the time and the bandwidth to do the things that we're experts at. And we have to understand we need to be the experts in that area. And AI is going to be one of the key tools to be able to do it, to support it, not to replace us. Though there are going to be jobs that are replaced. Let's be clear. There are jobs that are going to be replaced because of AI. Good, because we don't want to do those jobs. We want to move to the next level. If you go back not too long ago when buyers were placing paper purchase orders, that's a long time ago, I know, but we wanted to get rid of all that stuff, right? We wanted to get rid of the errors to the invoices, errors to orders, and errors to contracts. All that stuff should be done by AI and by the tool sets so that we can step up, get the competencies in place to be able to really help the internal customer drive supplier-driven solutions.
Right, and I think the other thing too is we are so much more resilient now than we used to be. For example, we keep picking on IT, for example, but whoever sits in a CTO chair or CIO chair really makes a difference. So let's say the priorities change, right? And all of a sudden, let's say you want to go from you want to do a data center change, for example. You want to change from Amazon to Azure, whatever the case may be, right? Like all of a sudden, there's a paradigm shift at the top, and all your category strategies need to sort of follow along. And before, that would have been a disaster doing that manually. And with the advent of AI and automation, you can change the priorities and the category plan updates, which is pretty freaking cool. Because back in the day, that would basically mean you have to redo everything from scratch, which we have all done. It's a little excruciating, right?
Yeah. And one of the fun parts is on your box on the right, AI makes this possible by the third bullet is build dynamic recommendations in real time. There is data coming in every day that in the past we would just like, I can't take it. I can't make actions on it. Therefore, just let's push it aside. Well, now you have the ability to absorb that data, clean it up, and then come back and says, hey, you got to take immediate action. And the fun part about agentic AI, it can say, hey, supplier number 1 seems to have an issue. Let's go and contact them. Let's set up a meeting with them. Let's get a list of the concerns that we have so we can get action started before we even have the time to move forward. The agentic AI can actually do that for our 18,000, 20,000, how many ever suppliers we had, though my top suppliers were, let's say 1,500, we did 20,000, 18 to 20,000 suppliers a year. Who knows which one is going to cause that big problem? And they say, why aren't you watching over that? Well, now with AI, we can at least have a first pass at that and be consistently updated as to areas where we should take immediate action or take long-term planning actions.
So let's jump to the next slide. And the thing that I have a lot of fun doing right now, and you guys will see this in the next few slides, is creating overviews of categories, right? And now with the advent of AI and orchestration, if I can make that plug, internal and external landscapes are so much more easily attainable in terms of getting it and having it be complete. And let's be clear, right? Internal landscape is what's going on inside the organization, like so all the moving parts and pieces. And the external landscape is, the things that you face as you go to market, the things you have to look out for. And having those two things be complete, then you can layer on top of that what the organization wants to do, and voila, you have a plan. What have you seen out there in terms of making this happen using magic of AI and data consolidation?
The more competent our technology is, the cleaner our data becomes, the more data that's available to us to be able to take action. Historically, we didn't even have that data, as you mentioned. Today, it's been always that black hole of second and third tier supplier visibility. If I pick out one area, AI is going to allow us to understand what those suppliers, who those suppliers are. My hope has always been that we start getting commonality of data streams not only with our first tier suppliers, but through those first tier suppliers into our second and third tier. Why can't we start creating a consistency of discussion so that we're not reinventing the wheel on every supplier and every supply chain, with the goal of being able to have common data elements at every level, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier X, to be able to pull that data in? Because you'll find that your first tier supplier is not the problem. It is the second or third tier supplier that created that single source of failure, where all of your competitive suppliers are actually using a common player, and that common player fails or has an issue with logistics, with any number of other issues, including war, to the point where, okay, then all your suppliers are failing, and therefore you're not going to have the products you need. So having visibility and insight because of AI-driven data analysis for your second and third tier suppliers, I think is going to be revolutionary, not only for risk, but I think for cost performance. If you understand where there's weaknesses in that second and third tier, and you can bring in your expertise to be able to drive lower costs, not only for you, but your supplier and your supplier's supplier, you're going to be able, that's where the next generation of savings is coming from. It's not another negotiation or another aggregation. It is going to be, how do you actually change the entire supply chain?
I couldn't agree more. What I see a lot of now that, our customers are talking to us about, number one, here's our direct suppliers, the tier 1 suppliers. Can you use AI to find out who the second tier suppliers are? And let's say that you need to figure out which of these suppliers, which of these second tier suppliers do you have a contractual agreement with? Meaning, which ones are truly second tier suppliers for you? And then we can use capabilities such as API services or even more AI to determine what is the negative news assessment or adverse media for your second and first tier suppliers? What is the compliance aspect of the second and first tier suppliers? What is the, do you have any sanctions for your first and second tier suppliers? And all this happens sort of dynamically, which is kind of cool, right? So you can say that, a supplier is global in nature and has a compliance issue in Asia, for instance. Do you care about that in the United States? Maybe not, maybe not, but it's something you should look at. And without having access to that information, oftentimes you fly in blind and you don't actually know. So obviously I'm geeking out about this big time, right? Because this is something that I would have loved to have seen when I was a CPO back in the day.
It would have changed the world. Now, another little minor activity. So you have all this data. What do we still need to do? We still need to get our internal customers to understand what we're saying, understand the impact. What's the return on investment for a move? What's the risk if we don't make a change? How do we coordinate that information to give the internal customers intelligent information that allows them to actually make decisions that are going to be supportive? And what I find is AI does a really good job of taking the data we have and with multiple iterations, create the environment where people go, wait a minute, that's important. I've got to make changes and not have to spend hours and hours literally doing it in seconds to be able to get that information across. It is certainly an opportunity. And I know I've sent a lot of information off to people and they turn around going, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Perfectly good to me. I fully understand it, but I'm not getting the point across effectively and therefore failure. So the AI engines can be really good at taking all that data and making it easier to understand and easier to drill down into. So the internal customer says, I get the thoughts. I know I need to take action. Give me a plan of action with either an alternative supplier or whatever. That's important. And if we don't get the internal customers to move, then we're not doing our job.
Awesome. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about what you just mentioned in terms of from inputs to insights, right? So at the end of the day, so you have all this information out there. How do you make it digestible? How do you make sure that you can do something with that information? So, one of the things I love doing is bringing on new folks into my organization, and I can look at a report and know something is wrong immediately, right? Because I've been doing it a few times, and so can you, Roy, and teaching them sort of where to look for the problems in the data sets, for example. So what we're going to show you in the next little bit are 4 examples of dashboards that we have created for customers. It's actually one category assessment, but it's kind of broken down into 4 spaces. Anything before we jump in there?
Yeah, just the idea of prioritization. So one of the things we have to understand, we have so much stuff. Don't give them the little picayune stuff, and then they start getting immune to it. They go, wait a minute, you sent me 20 items, and none of them really change the. They don't move the lever. Then we have to automate and go realize, you know what? It's not about the quantity. It's like, what are the 2 that really make a difference? So prioritization becomes really important.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump to see some dashboards, and this is where we nerd out. So what you see in front of you right now, I'm sorry about the eye chart because we try to put so much information into these things these days, right? But at the top of the banner here, you can see that this is an overview of enterprise software as a category of spend. And you can see the risk and criticality, which is also known as the CrawlJig score, who owns the category in terms of the supply, in terms of internally within procurement as well as a business unit. You can see what leverage you have based on 5 assessments, right? It's CrawlJig, Porter, Pestle, switching risk, and then SWOT, right? Again, like these are done by AI using the inputs below. And then you get operational metrics within the category, right? So how much money you spend, is it growing? Is it going up or down? How much of that is on PO? How much of that is on contract? How much are what is the spend concentration, average days to pay, how many invoices per year, like all that kind of stuff. And again, back in the day, this would have taken weeks to get. Anything that jumps out at you?
Yeah, well, the idea of understanding the separation of your suppliers based upon those that are partners of yours, and that you have to have a one-on-one relationship, long-term relationship. Well, those actions you're going to take and the internal customers that tie to those partnerships, it's a radically different talent that you want to have in those discussions. Now we're talking about providing information to improve the partnership, to be able to build on long-term activity. And then where are they investing that it's going to support, or get them to invest effectively that it's going to support your long-term vision with your internal customers, versus those suppliers that are tactical in nature. And unfortunately, same with some of my students, they do the easy stuff first and put the hard stuff off for later. A lot of my teams I'd sit there and go, why are you spending time on this easy stuff? Because the hard stuff is where we need to be known. This is where we need to be able to make a difference. This is where we're going to make the name of the supply chain valuable to our internal customers. Well, easy stuff, you can check off the box and feel like you did a good job when you go home. And I said, well, you know what? If none of that happens, it's not going to move the needle. It's the hard stuff that we got to go after. So, getting people to realize you got to go after the hard stuff. And that the chart there actually just highlights it for you. It makes it a lot easier for you to be able to attack it, drive your metrics around it, challenge your team on how they're going to go about those items, and then be supportive in that process.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next slide. And again, we're talking about the enterprise software category here. An overview of how many POs get sent out per year and per month, how many renewals are coming up in this space, and then how many requests are coming in, to the enterprise services category, whether that's up or down. But now we sort of get to one level below a typical category analysis, which is how much is your diverse spend absolutely and as a percentage of total spend. And how are they breaking down by minority, MWOPs, and veteran businesses, for example, right? And how are you meeting your target or not? And this is for our European friends. What is the scope 3 impact of this specific category? And who are your biggest emitters? Again, this is AI information paired with API available information, where we can actually figure out, using the spend method as well as the supplier reporting method on the scope 3 emissions of the specific category, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, the idea of having understanding of your carbon footprint and understand that carbon footprint in most cases is supplier driven. So you need to be first and foremost in front of that activity, but you need the data to be able to drive it. So having it made available to you this simply is excellent. But one of the things that I get from when I talk to various CPOs around the world, they go, Roy, yeah, all nice stuff, but I still have the blocking and tackling to do. I still have to source. I still have to put out contracts. I still have to make sure orders are processed effectively. One of the things I told my teams, and I tell them, I said, yep, it has to get done, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done by you. So find the technology that's going to get it done. If the technology can't do it, what are the suppliers' responsibility getting the pieces done? What's your internal customers' requirements, because you've given them the self-service technology to get a lot of that work done? And then how can you use third-party or outsourcing to be able to drive that? So once again, your internal core team is driving real value and not just the tactical transactional activity. And I'll tell you, that's the difference between what I call an immature organization to a more mature organization, is being able to have that separation of activity.
Very cool. I agree 100%. Moving right along. This here is, again, more information in a specific category. So the top left-hand corner is the contracts and when they're expiring. Top right-hand corner are the projects. So how many projects are you running currently in this category? How many did you do last year? And what were the savings from them? And what does the pipeline look like in the next 12 months? And again, like, if you start planning, this is pretty cool stuff to have in one spot, because then you can actually put resources against it, right? And then below that, you have the supplier makeup, right? So here you have, you talked about this earlier. Who are your top suppliers? What are the riskiest suppliers? And what are the active things that you need to do? So you can see here that Accenture needs a new SOC 2, Palantir, showed up in a sanction screen, those kinds of things. But even more cool is the sub-processor. So who are the sub-processors on the list that your top tier suppliers are using? And what do we know about those suppliers? And again, you can see how AI and API information works together here to create a really clear picture about what's happening in this category.
Yeah, it makes it really effective, is that as you go and have your meetings with your key suppliers, that you have the data necessary. As importantly, is that whatever data that you can get to your supplier and say, hey, let's make this not an output where it's like, well, let me tell you information. The information should already be shared. So now you're talking not about getting through that information, but actually, what are the actions we're going to take to improve it? So now 90% of your meeting is on actionable programs and results that can be anticipated versus just going through the numbers. The more you can do this with agentic AI, the more you can share this information that's made available, the more both sides, meaning the supplier, the internal customer, procurement, they're all in agreement that this is accurate and complete data, the better off you're going to be to get actionable results. And the meetings become far more valuable than the meetings before, which was 90% transactional and 5% strategic.
100%. And last but not least, we'll move on to the last slide here, which is around our leverage. As in, this is how we look at the external landscape, right? So we take all the internal landscape, we use that as API fodder into the queries, and we come up with all this great analysis. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, right? But Qualtrics tells you how important this category is for you. Porter tells you what your relative leverage is. Pestle talks about political, environmental, technological, those kinds of things. One thing I love is the switching risks in the category, right? So enterprise software is probably pretty high, but you think about janitorial services and printing and so on and so forth. And last but not least, what is a SWOT? And I love the fact that we have a bug here on our screen, which is pretty cool in the SWOT analysis. But yeah, so you don't have to fix it now. It's all right. So as you can see, a lot of this stuff is done, and doing this analysis manually would take a lot of time. But having it done automatically is pretty freaking cool.
Yeah. I mean, obviously having it right there, ready to go. So instead of building it, you're acting upon it is really, really good. Though I can't see much of it, Anders.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. We need to figure out how to get this blown up better.
Yeah, we have to do a better job of focusing.
Yeah, but all to sort of say, like, we came up with a moderate leverage here in this category. And a lot of that comes from the fact that switching enterprise software is typically pretty hard. It's a lot of risk around it, a lot of hair on it. So that's why we don't tend to switch suppliers very often, right? So that's it in terms of nerding out about dashboards and all the kind of cool stuff we're building. So thanks. You wasted a perfect good half hour of your day with us, which we greatly appreciate.
And I enjoyed it.
We're going to have another podcast in just under a month. So please register here, and we would love to hear from you guys. If you got anything out of this at all, category management has always been near and dear to my heart. It is something that we are developing very, very quickly here at Focal Point. So I would love to nerd out with you if you have nothing else going on. So please register for the next episode. And Roy, thanks a lot for joining us as always.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.